Hello and welcome to the Portrait Drawing Enrichment with me, Mr. Roberts. This is the second of two Portrait Drawing Enrichments, so if you haven't yet done the first, I really do recommend that you go back and you try that one before you begin this one. It will be really helpful, and I've put the link to that in the description to this video, so that will be easy for you to access. Now, last week we looked at using something called a face cannon in order to correctly position the features of the face on our picture, because we know that there are misconceptions and we think the eyes are up here and we get it a bit wrong. But from looking at the pictures that you all posted in the Enrichment Padlet page, wow, you did an excellent job. I can see that you really took that on board. We also looked at the skill of reflection, and I can see that a lot of you must have really practiced, then looked at your practice and reflected on how it could be even better, because I was so struck by the quality of the artwork that you were showing me on Padlet. I really was. Now this week we're going to look at a really important artistic skill that's actually got a lot to do with science. But don't worry, if you're not very confident with science, that doesn't matter, because this is art and we're going to explore it in an artistic way. Today we're looking at shading. Now, why do we use shading in art? Well, when we draw a portrait, and the portraits you drew last time, they looked fantastic, but without shading, they can look like a picture, they can look a bit flat. But when we shade something, we give it form and we give it depth, and it starts to look three-dimensional and it starts to come to life. So that's what we're going to be doing today. So I suggest let's have a look at what we're going to need to take part today. So you will need one ruler, a pencil, a rubber, and a pencil sharpener. So here's a picture of a circle that I drew, and as you can see, this is just a standard line drawing and it looks pretty flat. But look what happens when I shade it. That flat circle becomes a sphere, and suddenly it's three-dimensional. Suddenly we've given it form and we've given it depth. But there are some things that we need to know if we want to do good shading. Skills that we need to develop, such as pressure control, how to shade smoothly, and light behaviour. And they're the three things that we're going to look at and practice in this video. So first, let's explore pressure control. Pressure control refers to the amount of pressure that we apply to the pencil when we're shading. And this creates what we call different light values. So as you can see, when we press really hard, it makes it really dark. But as we relieve that pressure, as we press less hard, it makes it lighter. So we have higher light values. If we only include the high light values or the low light values in our picture, it will look really flat. So it's good to make sure you're using the full range of light values in your picture. Okay, so it's time to pause the video and practice this skill now. So can you use your pressure control to create a shading strip like I've done, from low light values all the way to very high light values? Can you practice doing that? You can also practice doing this by drawing a rectangle, dividing it into boxes, and seeing if you can shade each box with a different light value, starting from really low light values, as dark as you can, really hard pressure, all the way down to the lowest pressure and the highest light values. So pause the video and have a go. Now, one thing that's really important skill to develop is shading smoothly and making sure that the shading looks smooth on the page. One thing people tend to do when they're learning how to shade is use their finger to smudge it, and it can make it look smooth, but it takes a lot of the dynamics out of the picture. And so I want you not to do that. The way that we shade smoothly is we keep the pencil really consistent and we make sure there aren't gaps between our shading lines. So we keep them close together and we go back over it, but we keep the pressure of our hands consistent too. So this is the next skill that we're going to develop. So I want you to draw a rectangle on the page. You don't need a ruler for this, just a rough rectangle. And I want you to practice shading smoothly. So remember, the technique here is to make sure that the shading lines are close together. They're all going the same direction, and that you're applying a regular pressure. Just a bit of a tip for you, it's actually easier to shade smoothly without a sharp pencil. So if you have got a really sharp pencil, you just do a bit of scribbling to blunten it a bit, because that will make your shading more smooth. There you go, pause the video and have a go at shading smoothly within a little rectangle. Okay, so the next thing we're going to look at is light behaviour, and this is really important in art. But all we really need to understand is when we put a physical object in front of light, it blocks it. And so we end up with areas that are shaded. And when we're shading in a picture, we're trying to replicate that shaded area so that we're picking out those areas that are light and those areas that are dark. And so the first thing we need to understand in order to shade correctly is where the light's coming from. And I'm showing that in my video here with the yellow dotted lines. If we were to draw a line between where those two dotted lines met, that would give quite a good indication of which parts of this sphere or this ball should be light and which parts should be shaded. But there are different types of light we need to consider when we're shading a picture. There's direct light that shines directly onto the object, but there's also light that's reflected off other surfaces too. At the bottom of the object, where it touches the surface, the light is completely obscured. And so here we have the darkest shadow, the occlusion shadow, where we have the lowest light values. But also, we can see we have a cast shadow, a shadow that has been cast by the object itself. Now, we can see how long that shadow should be by drawing two lines from the light source, like so. Now finally, on the lighter side of the object, we have the core light and we also have the highlight. And so we're working on being creative, and we've explored lots of different techniques. Now I want us to practice those and evaluate those techniques and apply them to a drawing of an apple. We're not moving on to the face just yet. So I want us to draw an apple. You don't actually need one in front of you. We all know what an apple looks like. And we're going to use our knowledge of light behaviour and shading in order to make this look as realistic, three-dimensional, give it as much form and depth as possible. And so the first thing I need to do is identify where the light's coming from and the light source. And I'm going to do that like this. And when I draw these lines, that will show me how long the cast shadow will be. By drawing a line between where those two lines meet, I can identify which is the lighter side of the apple and which is the shaded side of the apple. So the first thing I'm going to do now is start working on the cast shadow. Does that make it look as though this object really exists in space? There you go. Now you notice how close to the base of the object the cast shadow is much, much darker. And that's because there's much less light there. And see how I'm turning the page to make it easier for myself rather than twisting my wrist around. So now I'm going to start shading the main body of the object, or the apple, that's what we're doing, along that line between the two light lines. And I'm going to build that shade up. It's best to start light and build the shade up as you go along. But as you can see, I'm already starting to indicate where it is darker, where there is less light values. So making sure that it's really dark around the base. That occlusion shadow, where it's really dark, and then building it up. So where the object is getting more light, the shading is lighter, I'm using less pressure. And where the object is getting, or the apple is getting less light, I'm applying more pressure to make a darker shadow. And how I hold the pencil, I don't hold it directly above, point straight down, I hold it at a real angle, and that allows me to have more control over the pressure. And so you can see the more light values that I include in my picture, the more three-dimensional, the more depth, and the more form I create. And it really starts to pop. There you go. So one thing that's missing at the moment, I'm going to add the highlights to my picture using the rubber on the end of my pencil. So there you have it. I've brought my picture of an apple to life with shading. I've given it form and I've given it depth. And I've managed the pressure control, I've been shading smoothly, and I've thought about the light behaviour. And I know that some of you may want to stop there with the apple exercise. It is a good exercise, so well done if you complete that. But I want you all to be really creative. And creative means that we've explored lots of different ideas, lots of different techniques, and we've explored pressure control, we've explored how to shade smoothly, and we've also explored all the complications of light behaviour. But once we've done all that exploration, it's time to apply it, to evaluate it all and apply it. And I would like you now to apply everything that you've learned in this enrichment to last week's self-portrait. And this gives you a chance to really personalise that learning and use it in a different way. Okay, so I look forward to seeing your attempts on the Padlet page at the end. Some will be apples, but I hope lots of you have a go at creating more form and depth to your portraits from last week. Notice how I use the direction of the pencil strokes to really indicate the form and shape. Right, so it's definitely your turn now. So have a go at your self-portraits and use the QR code to upload your picture of your self-portrait to the Padlet page. If you haven't got a QR reader, you can go back and use the link on the Distance Learning Enrichment calendar. I can't wait to see all your fantastic work.